I'd like to start by sending a huge thank you to those who reached out to me concerning 3-year-old Sylena Herrnkind, who we'll be discussing today. I covered this story close to 3 years ago on TikTok back when I was still active on there, which led to me having conversations with people who were much closer to this situation. Today's story would come to be known as one of the worst cases in this city's history involving a child, and as we've grown used to on this channel and countless others on this platform, the details involving kids are always extremely upsetting, but the stories have to be told. Before moving forward, please keep in mind that these details are going to be very hard to listen to. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, this is No Escape, the story of Sylena Herrnkind.
Had been investigated by the city's Administration for Children's Services, and their kids were taken away in 1998, but they eventually regained custody.
Sylena Herrnkind was born on October 19th of 1998 and resided in Staten Island, New York. Before her birth, her family lived in Richmond Terrace in the neighborhood of New Brighton, located on the island's North Shore. She was born to a woman named Julie Herrnkind, 24 years old, and Matthew Herrnkind, 27. The couple met in 1996 while both working at a precinct on Staten Island. Matthew was a cadet while Julie volunteered there, running errands and answering phones. They were friends at first, and it eventually led to a relationship, one that grew serious pretty quickly. The couple would soon marry, and their first child was born later that year. Matthew, who had a different last name, would take Julie's last name after marriage. They would settle at their home in Richmond Terrace, where they would remain until 2001. From the outside looking in, the young couple looked to be just like any other, married and starting a family. But with time, their behavior would tell an entirely different story. Neighbors would begin to notice that while they seemed to be quiet young parents at first, the couple acted very different behind closed doors. There were often domestic disturbances at that home in Richmond Terrace. Those incidents involved the children that they had brought into the world. By late 2001, the couple now had 5 children, ranging from ages 14 months to 5 years old. I would normally love to sit here and tell you about all the happier times, but unfortunately, they didn't have those very often. Authorities and child services were called to the home numerous times over the years. The safety and well-being of these children was questioned every single time. There were a lot of red flags, and they were impossible to ignore. From January of 1997 all the way to the summer of 2001, the Herrnkinds would have numerous run-ins with the law and the Administration for Child Services. On January 7th of 1997, a call was made to the child abuse hotline. The caller stated that the Herrnkind home was filthy, littered with garbage, and infested with roaches. The caller would also say that the couple left their infant child outside in the freezing cold, wearing a thin layer of clothing. This allegation of neglect was dismissed by ACS because they said it couldn't be proven. In July of 1998, the couple was reported to ACS when their second daughter, just 1 year old at the time, was found with bruises on her face, her stomach, her ribs, and her buttocks. Julie Herrnkind would tell authorities that the child injured herself while she was playing with toys and often running into her crib when she ran around, but that didn't seem to add up. In a little over a year, the allegations went from neglect to full-blown violent beatings being suspected. A doctor reported that the injuries were not consistent with her explanations. The couple was arrested this time, but again, the charges were dropped. It was stated that there wasn't enough evidence, mainly because ACS failed to tell prosecutors about the statements made by that doctor when it came to the child's injuries. Because of that, they wouldn't be able to prosecute the couple. The children, ages 1 and 2, are put into foster care, placed with the same family. In October of 1998, Sylena was born. She was barely in this world for a few days before being placed in foster care. She wasn't placed in the same home as her sisters. From the very moment she was born, she was facing a hard life, placed in the hands of complete strangers, all because of decisions made by her so-called parents. It wouldn't get any better anytime soon, and there were just more and more red flags that would continue to pop up. Throughout 1999, a lot would take place. The couple would be allowed to visit their children who were still in foster care. They were granted unsupervised visitations in their home. During a visit in April of 1999, Julie was seen verbally abusing the children right outside of the foster home. She was investigated for this, but nothing ever came of it. Just a month later, in May of 1999, a petition was filed to terminate unsupervised visits. This was because the 2 young girls were said to be acting out in a very inappropriate manner, and this was only right after being with their parents, indicating that the children might be experiencing other forms of assault in addition to everything else. The children were kept from their parents for a little while, but doctors found no evidence of that type of assault, so pretty soon, the unsupervised visits resumed. In August of 1999, the 4th Herrnkind child was born, a baby girl. Despite everything you just heard, she's allowed to remain with her so-called parents. In December of 1999, the foster mother who had been caring for the 2 eldest Herrnkind children since 1998 reported that the 2 girls came back from a visit with their parents and they were completely filthy. One of the girls had a lump on the back of her head, which the parents blamed on her. They said she threw herself back on the floor, causing the injury. Later, the story changed, with them saying it happened while the kids were playing. But nothing is done, and there's no documentation to support that the court was ever informed. The foster care agency involved made it very clear that these children were not safe, and there seemed to be a serious lack of communication here. Like info was either being omitted, never documented in the first place, or just simply wasn't taken seriously. Throughout all of this, the Herrnkinds had started their process of regaining custody of the children. They would agree to go to anger management and take parenting classes, a 12-week course that they would need to complete before being considered for reunification. They completed those classes, and a judge approved custody. On March 8th of the year 2000, Julie and Matthew Herrnkind are given full custody of all of their children. This was mainly because the main caseworker who had contact with this family, Carrie Ann Marks, testified that day. She says she never saw any bruises or wounds on any of the children during a visit at the Herrnkind home. She said they were all playing and there were toys everywhere. But regardless of appearances, the complaints continue to pile on. Just a month after getting the children back, another call came into the child abuse hotline, and it was regarding the children being left alone in a filthy home. Sylena is found with a deep bruise on her left temple. The so-called parents blame it on her, saying that she was climbing out of her crib and fell on her head. The claim is dismissed. Caseworker Marks would report that the couple was physically and mentally capable of caring for the children, even if she also stated in this same report that the couple seemed to be suffering from depression and anxiety from having to care for so many kids. She reported that their house was clean and organized. The children appeared happy, and she didn't feel the parents would ever risk losing their children again. But for others, it was blatantly obvious that this is exactly what they were doing. Complaint after complaint, and not a thing was being done. The allegations of neglect and violent behavior toward these kids were quickly forgotten. Between June of 2000 and June of 2001, the family was closely monitored by ACS, and a home care worker was sent to the home to help with chores and to help keep the place suitable for the children. The worker was assigned to the home for 12 hours a week, but that was quickly changed to 30 hours, meaning she was there 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. The children did their best to live a normal life, but that was close to impossible. Most of the time, they weren't even allowed to play with other kids. They tried to make the best of their time together, but these so-called parents never made that easy. Sylena was described as an adorable, vibrant child, a curious little girl who seemed well-behaved and very quiet. In August of 2000, Sylena and her sisters welcomed their baby brother into the world. It was a brief distraction from the constant violence and neglect. But what followed were even more reports to ACS, and this made it very clear that these children were being treated cruelly, and it wasn't going away. In fact, it was only getting much worse. Neighbors would begin to notice that these children were being treated differently from one another. Sylena and her sister, whom according to reports was said to be on the spectrum, were specifically singled out. The so-called parents barely acknowledged Sylena at all. Whenever neighbors saw her, she was just very quiet. She would just sit there. When the holidays came around, 2 of Sylena's siblings were dressed in pretty, colorful dresses, while she and her other sister wore jeans and t-shirts. While there were already alarming signs of violence against the kids, it would become even worse when the so-called mother of the children shaved Sylena and her sister's heads because they'd been ripping out their own hair. Sylena and her sister would often be seen with missing chunks of hair in their scalps. Anytime their hair grew back, Herrnkind would shave their heads again. It was just another sign that something here was very wrong. While the other children seemed to be favored over Sylena and her sister, They too were suffering. Throughout Sylena's 3 years on this earth, she and her siblings would suffer from a plethora of injuries, and they only became worse with time. Everything ranging from cuts, bruises, and burns, not to mention the neglect that was well known about and reported several times. By summer of 2001, the injuries had become even more obvious. It was then that a social worker visited the Herrnkind home and found Sylena with 2 black eyes. She had clearly been struck. The so-called parents would blame it on one of her sisters. A few weeks later, Sylena is brought to Staten Island University Hospital. She's suffering from a broken leg, more specifically, a broken femur. She's put in a body cast and unable to walk. The Herrnkinds tell ACS and doctors that Sylena fell from her bunk bed, and they believed it. It seemed that no matter how much worse things became, nobody cared to stop it. Despite the numerous red flags and all of the open investigations involving this family, not much was done. Julie was now pregnant again, as the children experienced the worst, spending day in and day out in a house of horrors. But it would all come to an end on November 5th of 2001, when 3-year-old Sylena would suffer the unimaginable. That afternoon, at around 3:30 p.m., a 911 call was placed regarding a child who wasn't breathing. The call was to a home on Boyd Street, the Herrnkind home, for about 9 months at this time. EMS workers and authorities arrive and find a calm Julie Herrnkind as they ask where the child is. They make it to the bathroom and find Matthew Herrnkind administering CPR to Sylena. EMS workers quickly grab her and move her to another room so they could try to work on her, but they already feared the worst. Her body was wet and ice cold, covered in bruises, an absolutely horrifying condition. She had no pulse, and her heart didn't appear to be beating. They put a breathing tube down her throat and gave her medicine to try and revive her, but they're unsuccessful. They immediately rushed little Sylena to St. Vincent's Medical Center. A doctor sees that she's possibly been underwater and tries to revive her, but she was already gone. She was technically dead on arrival, but she's officially pronounced dead at 3:59 p.m. An almost 5-year history of obvious violence and neglect ends with a child deceased in her own home. How she ended up lifeless on that hospital bed was unclear at first. Of course, all eyes were on the so-called parents. The next morning, Julie and Matthew Herrnkind were arrested and charged with second-degree murder, second-degree assault, and 3 counts of endangering the welfare of a child. As soon as they were brought in, they were questioned separately regarding how events unfolded. Authorities had many questions regarding exactly what was done to this child, and the answers to those questions would leave them sick. Julie Herrnkind would give authorities a written confession, laying out how the events unfolded in sickening detail. According to her, it all started when Sylena had an accident and soiled herself. Herrnkind started out by slapping Sylena, hitting her so hard that her head hit the corner of the bathtub. Then Matthew came in, taking the child's small body and slamming her into the bathtub, forcing her to stay down. She cried out for mercy, but instead of letting her up, he would take a used Brillo pad made of steel wool and began to scrub her legs with it. He did this with so much force that he would scrape her skin off. As if this wasn't as barbaric as could be already, while she lay there, crying in horrible pain, both monsters would take syringes, fill them with alcohol and peroxide, and pour them onto the areas her skin had been scraped off, right into the wounds. They were torturing this child. Her cries became louder as the pain intensified. They then took a bar of soap and forced it down her throat, causing her to choke. And this is when Matthew took her face and forced it under the ice-cold water that was running from the faucet. The water filled her mouth and nostrils, making it impossible to breathe, especially with an airway trapped with soap. Without thinking twice, they left her battered body in the tub full of ice-cold water as she lay there, choking and running out of breath. Her screams and cries became quieter until they went away entirely. Sylena was gone. When she saw the child wasn't breathing, Herrnkind placed her call to 911, with emergency services arriving a few minutes later, although by then, it was already far too late. The years of violent treatment that her siblings endured since before she was even born ended with her. When an autopsy was conducted, a medical examiner concluded that Sylena was a victim of battered child syndrome, meaning there were wounds and bruises all over her body at different stages of healing, some fresh, some old, and some still healing. Her wounds told a story of merciless beatings and complete disregard for her life. She had 74 bruises on her small body, described as malnourished, with almost no body fat. She weighed only 22 pounds and hadn't gained any weight in the last 18 months of her life. It was hard to imagine that a child could experience such cruelty, especially so often. "I thought we went too far this time. Oh my God, we killed this kid," she wrote, making it clear that this type of treatment wasn't new and they were fully responsible for brutally taking this child's life. Matthew Herrnkind would also give a written statement saying that they stuffed Sylena's mouth with a bar of soap because she cursed and spoke back to her mother. When he tried to take the soap out of her mouth, she backed away, so he put her head under the water to try to wash it out. When he was unsuccessful, they left her there, lying on her side, slowly dying. Paramedics found him doing CPR on Sylena, a supposed attempt to get her to breathe again, but they had gone to painful lengths to make sure that she was silenced. It was clear from how they treated her, giving her black eyes, breaking her bones, scrubbing her skin off, treating all of these children like they meant nothing. When all was said and done, every one of the children in that home endured neglect and violent treatment on an almost daily basis. Her siblings were treated for cuts, bruises, and burns, with the 14-month-old child in the home suffering from several broken ribs. A child who couldn't even speak or walk yet was already being battered. All children would once again be placed into foster care. A woman who was considered to be a grandmother to the children would make her way from Virginia to Staten Island to try and get custody of them. This was a woman who was formerly of Staten Island herself and fostered Julie Herrnkind back when she was a teenager, so they were close. Her attempt to gain custody would spark controversy when haunting information from her past resurfaced. This went back to July 13th of 1987. That's when this woman's son took a knife and attacked her live-in boyfriend, resulting in fatal wounds to the victim's abdomen and chest. That victim also happened to be his former best friend, which was why they were fighting in the first place. This was one of many arguments that escalated, this time ending in bloodshed. After he took his life, he took his body upstairs and threw him off the roof to make it look like the victim did it himself. A dark past that would eventually trickle down to these kids. It would be a very heartbreaking and confusing time for all of them, and there was simply nothing that they could do about it. When Sylena's life was taken, the entire neighborhood would learn of her devastating last moments. But of course, many weren't surprised. Some who were interviewed stated that they were well aware of the filthy home and the children being beaten, but they never imagined that they would take a child's life. It made them regret not reporting what they saw. Others stated that they saw no signs at all, which can be quite hard to believe when you hear what everyone else witnessed and how often. They had seen the dirty clothes and the bruises. They saw how Sylena and her sister on the spectrum were treated like outcasts, all red flags. Once the journalists and cameras came around, it seemed many more people were willing to speak, and they shared some rather troubling information. According to them, they didn't believe it was Matthew hurting the children, because they always saw him as a doting father who catered to them. They said he was the one always cooking and cleaning in the house, but Julie spent most of her time playing video games, and neither one of them had a job. A neighbor was quoted as saying the following: "He wasn't a bad guy. She played him like a puppet. Every time she got pregnant, she didn't want the baby. She said he was forcing her to have them. She was always stressed out and tired." Another neighbor said they genuinely had no idea that this was happening. They even let their grandchild play with the girls a few times since everything seemed normal. But that wouldn't last very long because the girls were no longer allowed to play. All of these signs pointed at a much bigger problem, one that would inevitably end in tragedy. While people spoke among themselves surprised at the horrific outcome, it was no surprise at all. The signs were there. No amount of blame could ever bring Sylena back or undo her suffering. All that was left was making sure that these two monsters responsible paid for what they did. The next few years would be non-stop trips to court and ups and downs regarding the custody of the children. Matthew and Julie Herrnkind would end up having separate trials. Like always, the so-called parents blamed each other for Sylena's final moments. Her defense attorneys would say that she was a helpless mother in fear for her life. She couldn't possibly stop the towering father of the children from beating on them. She cared about them. Lawyers went on to say that Julie Herrnkind had a history of trauma and assault, having been violated several times when she was young. So her being violent toward her children was not possible because she too was a victim. Matthew Herrnkind's defense attorneys would say that he was a victim of Julie's mistreatment and he followed her orders so he could keep her happy. They stated it was she who was responsible for the injuries and the neglect, and she controlled Matthew. They also stated he had no knowledge of what was being done to the kids. The lawyers also tried to have their grisly confessions dismissed, stating that they weren't in the right state of mind, and information was misconstrued by detectives. Julie said she was in a different part of the home when Sylena's life was taken, so her confession wasn't real. But it was clear to everyone by this point that they were both fully responsible, one way or another. They just had excuse after excuse. The doctor who pronounced Sylena deceased at the hospital and the EMS worker who tried to revive her would both testify in court, offering their perspectives and sharing awful details of the child's condition. The foster mother of Sylena also testified. She said just about 2 weeks before her life was taken, the Herrnkinds threw Sylena a birthday party. She said she witnessed Julie Herrnkind slap Sylena across the face more than once that day, but she didn't do anything about it, and she didn't report it. There would be 3 out of 9 witnesses who took the stand, painting a picture of violence and cruelty toward these kids. Autopsy photos of Sylena's body were shown to the jury because it was impossible to really put it all into words. The injuries described landed completely different when they saw it for themselves. It showed a disturbing pattern of brutality. Her wounds told the story that she never had the chance to, and those images will remain with them for long after the trials. On Wednesday, September 17th of 2003, Matthew Herrnkind, who'd been facing a sentence of 25 to life, would plead guilty, finally admitting to everything he did to Sylena along with his wife. Because he struck a deal, he was instead sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. After numerous delays and lots of back and forth, on Tuesday, June 29th of 2004, Julie Herrnkind was sentenced to 25 years in prison. She denied ever doing anything to harm her child. She begged the jury for mercy, and she certainly did not deserve it. Despite the heartless and callous treatment of Sylena and her siblings, despite them taking her life in cold blood, as of the year 2022, both monsters responsible are free, able to live life and put the past behind them. But the innocent 3-year-old child who paid with her life will never get a second chance. No matter how many years pass by, she remains 3 years old forever. Some believe that the blame fell on multiple parties, from doctors to ACS to neighbors and family members. Others say this is the fault of the parents and no one else. It seems people only have that attitude when it comes to children for some strange reason. The bottom line is that child services have a job to do no matter what. It's obvious that not everyone is cut out to be a parent, which is why these agencies were created in the first place. When it comes to a child's life, there should be no excuses, and certainly no shortcuts. When children don't have a voice, it's up to everyone to do what they can. If not, there's a good chance it'll end like this. Whenever one of these cases makes the news and papers, it's like hearing echoes from the past, names and stories that have become synonymous with violence against children. For Sylena and her siblings, there was no way out, even with all the disturbing signs. This nightmare only came to an end when this child drew her last breath. If alive today, Sylena would be 26 years old. Rest in peace, Sylena Herrnkind, and my deepest condolences go out to her siblings. You aren't forgotten.